This is an AQA Psychology GCSE revision video for the Paper 1 topic of development with a specific focus on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So Piaget believed that cognitive development, so children's thoughts and their development and their understanding of the world, takes place in a 4-stage sort of ladder where children will climb as they gather knowledge about the world. This knowledge is gained through exploring and new experiences, so Piaget believed children were like scientists. Piaget also claimed that children don't know less than adults, they just think in a different way. So that through these 4 stages, children's thinking develops, and it is that which we are about to explore. So children are not capable of thinking logically because their brains are not mature enough. But as their brains develop, as they get older, they develop different kinds of thinking and eventually are able to think logically. So the 4 stages and ages are on the screen, and you do need to know these, so you might just want to make a note of them. You've got the sensory motor stage, which takes place from 0 to 2 years old. The pre-operational stage takes place from 2 to 7 years old. Concrete operational from 7 to 11, and formal operational from 11 plus. So we're going to now look at each stage in a bit more detail. So the sensory motor stage, taking place from birth to 2 years old, it consists of 2 parts, sensory and motor, and the names of them do help you to figure out what children are able to do in each of the parts. So in the sensory stage, it's when the baby's focus is on physical sensation. So often you will see them put a lot of things in their mouth while they're trying to get to grips with the world, so using their senses to explore, being scientists. And the motor section is the movement. It's because they develop basic physical coordination. So they learn how to grasp things, hold things, and they start to learn to walk. They also relate what they see with what they can do. The key part of the sensory motor stage that you need to be aware of is this concept that Piaget created known as object permanence. And he says that it's not until around 8 months old that children will develop this ability. So object permanence is knowing that an object exists even if it's out of sight. So often peekaboo fools children under the age of 8 months. They tend to think the person's disappeared just because their face is covered. Or if you put a toy underneath a blanket, they think it's magic and that the toy has disappeared, or they might get upset thinking the toy won't come back. So that demonstrates object permanence, which Piaget says at around the age of 8 months old, children then understand that objects do exist even though you can't see them. Moving on to the pre-operational stage, the key concept here is egocentrism. So children of this age, 2 to 7, according to Piaget, are egocentric, which means they're not able to see things from other people's points of view. They're very self-centered, basically. Egocentrism meaning, the focus is on the I, the self. And Piaget demonstrated this in the 3 mountains task, as can be seen on screen. So children were shown a model of 3 mountains, as you can see here, and they were seated on a particular side of the model with a doll on the other side. And then they were shown different cards, like you can see here, and they were asked which of the representations would the doll see. And Piaget found that children just weren't able to comprehend it and would often just give the perspective of what they could see themselves, which on this occasion would be this model down here. On to the concrete operational stage then, which is 7 to 11 years old. So Piaget says in the pre-operational stage, children cannot conserve, and by the time they get to concrete operational of 7 to 11, they develop conservation. So conservation is the understanding that the amount of something and the physical properties of something stay the same even though its appearance changes. So you can see, as demonstrated by the counters task, children in this stage of concrete operational 7 to 11 understand that there's the same amount of counters in both rows, they've just been spread out. Whereas children under the age of 7, so in the pre-operational stage, would think that there are more counters in this row because they've been spread out. And then the final part of Piaget's stage theory is the formal operational stage at 11 plus years old, where children are able to think in a more complex manner. So they are capable of formal reasoning, things like scientific experiments, knowing that you only need to change one variable at a time if you're going to identify cause and effect, so that independent variable, a bit like we do in research methods, but also can solve problems in an abstract way, so mathematics and algebraic equations. So that's what we mean by abstract thinking. Piaget tested it using the pendulum task, but that is just there as extra information. You would not necessarily need this for your exam, but you do need to be able to articulate what abstract thinking is. And so that example of mathematic algebraic equations is probably your best way to show the examiner you understand that. So that is Piaget's stage theory, but there are also a couple of more components that you need to know about Piaget's theory. And Piaget spoke about schemas and that children develop schemas as they get older. Now, a schema is a mental blueprint of information. It's a mental framework, packages of information that help us to understand the world around us. So Piaget suggested as we get older, we develop more complex schemas of things, and our schemas improve with age and experience through the processes of accommodation and assimilation. Accommodation is when we completely change a schema. So we might have a schema of a car as a very young child, but then we see a tractor and we know that a tractor is a different vehicle to a car. So we completely change that schema. We change it to vehicles rather than cars and tractors, and we put tractors, cars, buses inside of that schema. Whereas assimilation is where we would add to the same schema. So again, my example of vehicles as the schema, and we add buses, we add bicycles, because we understand that they are part of that same schema of vehicles or transport. So that is pretty much everything you need to know for Piaget's theory. You do also need to be able to evaluate the theory. So I'm going to put some sentence starters on the screen for you to consider, and then take this opportunity to pause the video, jot down your thoughts of how you could evaluate Piaget using SCOUT. So S stands for supporting evidence, C stands for contradictory evidence, but we're not going to explore any of that. O is an opposing theory, and we're not going to look at that. U stands for usefulness, which I want you to consider, and T for testability, so how Piaget got evidence for his theory. So with those three, please pause the video and have a think about how to evaluate it, and I'll go through it in 5 seconds. So Piaget conducted lots of experiments to test his ideas. He used the counters task to test conservation, he used the mountain task to test egocentrism, and he found support for his theory. So you can refer to the specific ages and the stages and what the children were and weren't able to do. Usefulness is that Piaget's theory has been applied to education. It's got very much a lot of use in education because students no longer copy off a board like they did in the 60s. Teaching's developed a lot thanks to Piaget, because Piaget has allowed education systems and teachers and schools to understand what children are able or aren't able to understand at a certain age, and therefore can produce activities and tasks to engage children and help their understanding. However, Piaget only tested middle-class European children, and a lot of the times he tested his own children, which is bad because it can't be generalised to children outside of Europe. It can't be generalised to children of different socioeconomic classes, like working class children, and therefore his theory is not necessarily applicable beyond who he tested it on. You have also got the ability here to talk about contradictory evidence if you are aware of the Naughty Teddy study and the Hughes Policeman Doll study. You can use those as it shows Piaget underestimated children's abilities, and therefore his theory is not as valid as we would assume it to be. However, if you're not familiar with those studies, then I recommend you go and watch the videos on Hughes and McGarrigle and Donaldson. But those 3 evaluation points on screen will be enough for you to evaluate Piaget's theory. So that concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.